This is World History 1, Chapter 14, the formation of Western Europe, 800 to 1500 AD. Church reforms and the Crusades. So during this time period, the Catholic Church was the main focal point of people's lives, and everything that people did revolved around the church. It was an age of faith, and also during that time, many churches were rebuilt and some were built for the first time. Although the church was the main focus of everyone's life, there were problems in the church. It became a very big organization, and it had so much power that there was some room for corruption. Some priests were illiterate, they couldn't read, and the prime job of the priest was to read and interpret the Bible and Scripture for their congregation. The popes, some of them were very immoral. At this point, no clergyman is supposed to get married. Many of them had mistresses and families on the side. Many accepted bribes and were very corrupt. And the bishops, some cared more about being feudal lords than they did about actually caring for their flock. There were three main issues that people had with the church at the time. As I already said, at this point, clergymen were not supposed to marry. Many priests did anyway, and had families. Simony was also another huge problem. What would happen is that, let's say a bishop died or a cardinal died, something like that. What's supposed to happen is that the next person who is qualified to get that position will be voted on and then would become bishop or cardinal. What was happening is that those positions were going to people that would bribe, pay off a higher official so that they would get that position. So it's another form of bribery. Lay investiture was another problem. What this was, the way it's supposed to go is when a church position opened up, someone in the church would appoint him, either a cardinal or a bishop, or the pope would appoint someone to be in the position that opened up. So what ended up happening a lot of times is people who were not involved with the church, kings and dukes, things like that, were appointing bishops and cardinals in their own countries. So let's say in England, for instance, let's say the Bishop of Canterbury, he had died, the position was opening up. What should happen is that the cardinals in England should get together and pick who the next Bishop of Canterbury is going to be. What would happen is that the King of England would fill that seat. So many people were upset by that. So as a result of all these problems in the church, there were some people that tried to reform it. Pope Leo IX and Gregory VIII tried to enforce papal law against simony marriages, and there's already rules against this stuff. Now they're just making sure that those rules are enforced, and the people that are violating these rules are being brought to justice. During the 11 and 1200s, the church was restructured to resemble a kingdom. Pope on top, like a king would be. Underneath him, you have cardinals. They would rule over a larger area. That area would be broken down into smaller areas where bishops would be in charge of several parishes. Underneath them would be the local parish priests. Very similar to a kingdom where you'd have the king, followed by noblemen, dukes, barons, things like that, followed by knights, and then so on. Popes. Popes at this time also formed what was known as papal curia. It was also a court. So these guys would advise the Pope on religious matters, and they would also hear religious cases having to do with canon law. Canon law is church law. Diplomats also traveled all around Europe to advise kings or barons, or just to enforce papal law. Along with that, if you're part of the church, you're supposed to pay a tithe, which is a tax. 10% of your income was supposed to go for social services to the poor. So everybody paid their tithe, and that was supposed to be to help the less fortunate. Also during this time, you have new religious orders that are cropping up. Friars. Friars are people who took vows like monks, but interacted with the world. So monks takes a vow. They're celibate, they're chaste. They go live in a monastery, and then they pray or they write books, things like that. Friars would take those same vows of celibacy and vows to be poor for their whole lives, but what they would do is they would also go preach to people. Friars owned nothing, they lived by begging. Two examples would be the Dominicans and the Franciscans. Women were allowed to join these orders, and they made their own orders too. However, something different here, unlike the friars, they couldn't travel and they weren't allowed to preach. Also during this time, many churches were built. Many of them were cathedrals. Cathedrals are cities of God. They were in every large city in Europe at the time, and they were decorated with as many riches as the Christians in the area could give. So some of them were very highly ornate and decorated very well. From 8 to 1100, they were built in the Romanesque style, which means they had high arches, they had heavenly roofs that were held up by thick walls and pillars, and very tiny windows. Then, after 1100, a new style of church architecture was born. It was the Gothic style, upward reaching again. However, instead of having small windows, they had huge stained glass windows and were much more stylized. And your example of this would be in Paris, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And that is the cathedral from the outside. So you can see how it goes up, very tall in the center. You notice that it has large windows all over, and there are more windows on the side, in fact, as well. Here's what it looks like at the top, where the arches are. So still some things from the Romanesque style, but as we'll see here in a minute, some things that are different. Here you can see the top of one of the stained glass windows. Here's what it looks like from a downward angle. So you see in the back, very large stained glass windows on the side let in lots of light, but still with that upward reaching high arcing ceiling. And then down here, these are the chairs, and this is where people would sit for church. The Crusades. So the next topic I'm talking about are the Crusades, and I will actually be writing a paper on these. So Emperor Alexius Comnenus of Constantinople. What he did is Constantinople, the Byzantine Emperor, had been shrinking for hundreds of years, less and less territory, and they were constantly at a threat of being invaded and having more territory stolen by the Turks. So the Emperor Alexius sent the Count of Flanders a letter asking him for a few hundred knights to come down, help him out, protect his borders, and help protect the other side of Christianity. Well, Pope Urban II heard about this letter, and he decided to take it into his own hands and help out the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. However, it wasn't like he was doing his dad a favor. He had his own personal motives as well. So, the Crusades. These were holy wars to take back the Holy Land. The Turks had taken territory from the Byzantine Empire. Part of the empire was Jerusalem and the surrounding area where Jesus lived, died, and was born. So they thought that this land that was sacred to the Christians should be in the hand of Christians. So there are many goals to the Crusades. It wasn't very clear-cut and wanted just the Holy Land back. It served many purposes for many people. They had economic, political, social, and religious goals. As I told you earlier, the Muslims controlled Palestine and were threatening Constantinople. So that's problem number one for the Orthodox Church in the Byzantine Empire. Problem two is, in Europe at this time, there weren't very many wars being fought for more territory. The borders were very well set. So you've got all of these knights whose main job is to fight in wars, and that's how they collect their salaries. Well, there's no wars to fight, no booty to take, so these knights began fighting each other and taking small chunks of land from different barons, lords, or anything like that. So it became very lawless in Europe. And this would threaten the church and the kingdom. So as I said, these knights would take a little bit of territory here or take some territory from the church because they had nowhere else to get their income from. So these knights who are fighting one another and who are changing territory back and forth, if they had a war to fight somewhere else, then they wouldn't be fighting in Europe. And the Crusades helped make that goal a reality. Here is a map of the First Crusade. So what you see here is this: the lines that are up and down are the states that will be set up by the Crusaders after the First Crusade. These lines here that go horizontal, that's what was owned by the Byzantine Empire. These ones that are at an angle here, that's owned by the Muslims, the Turks, and then you see the arrows, that's the route of Crusaders. So they started here, they came from Europe into Constantinople, they went into present-day Turkey, you see they went to Nicaea, Dorylaeum, then they cross over, take some more territory, Iconium, and they move down, and eventually they are successful in taking the Holy Land, and they set up these new Christian states here along the coast. However, they're not going to last for very long, and we'll see what they can do at the moment. Here's another map. Kind of shows the same thing, but it's a little bit more modern, so it's a little bit easier to see. Plus, you see where everyone comes from in Europe. So notice they're coming from all over Europe, but most of the people that are coming come from what is present-day France. So France wasn't one united kingdom at this point. It was several small provinces, each having their own duke and things like that in charge. So many of the knights came from there, and they all assemble in Constantinople. And you see here where the Byzantine Empire or the Orthodox Church has power. And then you see where the Crusaders come in, take territory, and their eventual goal of Jerusalem, which they will meet in 1099. Notice that 1096 is when the crusade starts, and that's when the Pope calls for the First Crusade. They don't have all the armies assembled and ready until 1097 in Constantinople. I mean, it takes 2 years to conquer Jerusalem. Here is an engraving of the knights going out on the crusade. Notice they're wearing their crosses on their chest, letting everyone know that they are knights fighting for the crusade. And these are the leaders of the First Crusade that you will see in the video. Here's another engraving of Pope Urban II, and this is him giving his call for the Crusades in the sermon. He's got the bishops in the church behind him, and then he's got all the people here listening to Mass, and he's telling them about the First Crusade. Here we see some of the siege weapons that the Crusaders had. This is a catapult. You could use it to hurl boulders or other types of material into a city, knock down the walls, things like that. Here is a trebuchet. It was like a catapult, but more powerful. And then here we have a siege tower. So you can see the big wheels. What this would do is it'd run it right up to the wall. It would have a ramp, and then in this basket here you'd have people, and they'd run down the ramp into the city. Here we see an artist painting of Crusaders once again, and you see the knights up front leading their cavalry charge against the armies out here, and you notice that some of them have been ridden down. So this is what some of the warfare would have looked like when the Crusaders were fighting against the Muslims. The Crusades. So who went on them? Younger sons that were looking for a place in society, or they wanted land or adventure. At this point, if you weren't the firstborn son, you were going to inherit pretty much nothing. So if you wanted to ensure your place in history or just make yourself comfortable living, you had to go out there and take it for yourself. So when you went on these crusades, A, people would think of you more highly because you're a crusader. B, you could take land from the Muslims and keep it as your own. Plus there's that sense of adventure, doing something in far off lands that no one else was able to do. Merchants profited from this. To go out on campaign, you needed lots of money. You had to buy your own supplies. You had to pay for your journey and guides and things like that. So merchants loaned money to people along the way. Plus all of the different people who had food and other types of supplies that people would buy also profited. Traders, people who wanted to go into the Middle East to trade goods, would follow the Crusaders because they would protect them. Also, during the First and Second Crusades, if you died during the Crusade, you were assured a place in heaven. Meaning you could commit any sin you wanted, but if you died in battle for the Crusades, straight to heaven. Many people wore red crosses, and if something happened, it was God wills it. And a lot of people who had committed a lot of crimes in Europe, this was appealing to them because they didn't want to die and go to hell.